Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Well, welcome to our last block on Islam and our first session. Most Muslims would have started a video session just like I did. It means peace and God's grace and blessing be with you. Class sessions in Islam, we start with this saying, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the merciful and the beneficent. Muslims in general are using Arabic terms within their language. For example, Allahu Akbar, you might have heard that before, maybe in not so pleasant circumstances, but that just means Allah is great or God is great. Or you would say Subhanallah, that means glory be to God. Or you may give somebody a compliment and it would say Masha Allah. Maybe like, you have a beautiful sweater on, Masha Allah, which means what Allah wishes. Or you may say Insha'Allah. Oftentimes you hear that when somebody makes an appointment, for example, let us see each other tomorrow, Insha'Allah, so God willing. We might also hear Alhamdulillah. That means praise be to God. So maybe somebody will ask you, how are you? Kayfa halak? And then you say, Alhamdulillah. Means praise be to God. In other words, I'm okay. I'm doing fine. So phrases like that you will often hear when Muslims talk with each other. Maybe even to somebody who is not Muslim, they might use those terms as well. In some ways it's somewhat similar, like we also do when we say, oh my God, right? I don't know how many of you are really thinking then at that point that you're praying to God, or when you just are upset with something, you just say, geez. You know, what you're really invoking is Jesus. That's how many Muslims are speaking with each other. I also thought that beginning our session today would be nice to do right in front of the mosque of Darul Islah here in Teaneck. See, it has the dome with the moon sickle and the star, and then it has a little minaret there, which is the tower of a mosque. And you may also know that we are in the month of Ramadan right now. Last Friday was the first day of fasting, and so this is a very special and holy time for Muslims. But let us start by considering the story of Islam. It all starts with Muhammad, who was born in 570 CE in Mecca. Mecca was the home of the Kaaba, an ancient sanctuary where people came to worship. It was kept by his grandfather, who was watching over the Kaaba. Muslims also call the year 570 the year of the elephant. There is a mention in the 105th surah of the Quran, Al-Fil, about an elephant attack on the Kaaba. In the Quran, the story is only mentioned in some ways. It is alluding to an attack by the elephant in the singular, and that there was an attack of birds that dispersed the enemies. And it was a warning that people should not dismiss the sanctuary, the Kaaba, because Allah will protect it. The story itself is more developed in a hadith, but we hear it by Ibn Isham and then by Ibn Ishaq, where the story is more developed. It's going back to a person calling Abraha, who was a ruler in Yemen, which at the time was Christian. Christians had come in from Africa and crossed over to Yemen, and Abraha was pretty strong in Yemen and had built a big church in the town of Sana'a. And he wanted to have everybody to come and have a pilgrimage to Sana'a, to this church. But the story is that the Arab tribes didn't want to really come to Sana'a, to the church, but that they started going to Mecca all the time to worship at the Kaaba. One time one of the Arabs even came into the church and defecated in the church, and therefore Abraha was really angry and decided to march against the Kaaba and to destroy it. That Allah protected the Kaaba even before Islam started. You might want to break away here and watch the movie about this event of the Year of the Elephant. That of course brings us also to the question what the Kaaba actually is. How is it that the Kaaba existed before Islam? Maybe you know that today the Kaaba is the central piece in the big mosque in Mecca. That is the subject of the pilgrimages of the Hajj that happens every year. The fifth pillar of Islam, one of the big tenets, is that every faithful Muslim should visit the Kaaba at least once in their lifetime if they can afford it financially and if they can make it health-wise. And so the Kaaba is the center of Islamic worship, as well as every time a Muslim prays, they have to find the Qibla that turns towards the Kaaba to pray. So the Kaaba is a really important place. And it's interesting that this is not something new with Islam, but it was supposed to have existed already before Islam came about. For Muslims, the story begins with Adam and Eve. Let me make you think back to very early on in our course when we talked about Hinduism and the bridge that comes up in Ramayana. It's called the Ram Setu between India and Sri Lanka. The other name for that was Adam's Bridge. And the Muslim mythology talks about that Adam and Eve, when they were ejected from paradise, came to earth to different places, that Eve landed near Mecca, and that Adam actually ended up somewhere in India, and I guess according to Indian mythology, on the island of Lanka. And that he came through this bridge, and eventually Adam made his way all the way to Mecca, where Adam and Eve met again. So it was the beginning right there where Mecca becomes the place from the very beginning where Adam and Eve met. But then the story continues with Abraham and Ishmael. That Abraham was the one who built the Kaaba for the first time, a house of prayer, where God was worshipped as one. The first monotheistic worship. You may want to cut away here too again to watch the video on the Kaaba. It is mythological, legendary. It might be interesting to watch the video. So, Islam would actually say that it is the original religion, that it just got lost at some point, and then when Muhammad came on earth, it was rediscovered. You can see that in the fact that all the way through the old prophets, Adam is seen as a prophet in Islam. So is Noah, so is Abraham or Isaac, and Ishmael, of course, and Moses, and all of the prophets that we already met through the Torah. All of them are seen as prophets. But the Muslim idea is that God wanted to reveal Islam all along, and all these prophets have tried again and again, and the people have received it and rejected it. And the writings that have occurred from that, the Torah and the Psalms, and also through Jesus, who is also the second most important prophet in Islam, that Jesus also came to bring the message and to reveal God's message again to people, that people have received it and then changed it, and therefore the Old Testament and the New Testament in Muslims' eyes are the revelation of God, but that has been corrupted. One thing that I have often asked myself is, if Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael and all these stories happened more further north in the land of Canaan and what then later became Israel, how come that when Abraham took Hagar and Ishmael away and put them into the desert, how did they come all the way halfway down into the Arabian Peninsula? And how is it that Abraham went all the way down there to build the Kaaba and then came back again and continued the story that we know from the book of Genesis? But here's some interesting news that will not be easily heard by Muslim ears. And that is that Mecca, where we put it today, may not actually be the Mecca in which Muhammad was born and where Islam was born and where the Quran was first revealed. This goes back to research by an archaeologist and Orientalist by the name of Dan Gibson. He has been in Levant and in Arabia for many, many years to study Nabateans that lived in this town of Petra. And in his research, he came across an interesting find. He began to look at the Qiblas of early mosques. A Qibla is the direction in which a Muslim prays. The Qibla shows exactly to the point where the Kaaba is, so that a Muslim always prays in the correct direction. But the earliest mosques for the first 100 years of Islam were not showing to Mecca. And that was a curious thing. It does say in the Quran at one point that Muhammad was changing the Qibla. It was originally, when Muhammad first began, the Qibla, the direction of prayer, went to Jerusalem. But then when the community was first developed in the town of Medina, the Qibla was changed and it was pointing to the Masjid Al-Haram, which is the masjid or the mosque in which the Kaaba is housed. And so if Muhammad said this already in the Quran, that the new Qibla was towards the Masjid Al-Haram, then it was curious that the first 100 years of mosques, that the Qiblas were not showing to what we today see as Mecca, but that after close examination, they all showed to the town of Petra in Jordan. And then comes the transitional period, where there are some mosques that are pointing to Petra, some mosques are pointing to Mecca, some mosques are pointing exactly in the middle. And then a little bit later, you have some mosques who are going parallel to a line that connects between Petra and Mecca. And then from some point on, all new mosques were all pointing towards Mecca. So in that kind of discovery, Dan Gibson is trying to figure out how to explain this. And he realizes that pretty much all of the stories that you find in the Quran, all the descriptions in the Quran, all of them fit the location of Petra a lot better than Mecca. I don't have the time to explain all this here, but if you would like to watch this yourself, turn away here again and watch Dan Gibson's documentary. That's a longer thing. You may not want to watch it right now, but maybe you want to wait until after the lesson. But watch those videos and make up your own mind about what that might mean. In any case, we can still maintain, of course, that Muhammad was born in Mecca and that Islam started in Mecca. Whether it was in the Mecca of today or whether it was Petra, that's up to you to decide. For the faith, I don't think it makes much of a big difference. And so, as I will continue to portray the story, I will follow the Islamic story as it's being told within Islam. Assuming that it is the city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, where the center of Islam is these days. And so let us go back to Muhammad and his life. Muhammad's dad died about a month or two before Muhammad was born. So he was raised by his mother, Amina bint Wahab, so raised by a wet nurse by the name of Halima. Amina, his mother, died when Muhammad was only 6 years old. He came into the care of his grandfather, who was the caretaker of the Kaaba, but he died 2 years after that, when Muhammad was only 8 years old. And so finally, Abu Talib was taking him in. That was his uncle. And he grew up in the house of Abu Talib. When Muhammad was only 13 years old, in 583 CE, he was hired by a rich merchant woman by the name of Khadija. She had in modern ways you might say, an export-import business. She was running caravans that traded with all different places. And Muhammad came into her employ, and he was leading caravans all over the place. He had a good reputation. He was seen as a very honest man, as a very intelligent man, and that everybody was happy to deal with him. He was so well regarded that in the year 595 CE, Khadija proposed to him for marriage. But they got married. He was faithful to her over the 25 years of their marriage. The marriage produced 4 daughters, the oldest one Fatima, and 2 sons. Important here to note for the later development of Islam is that the 2 sons died before Muhammad did. And so upon the death of Muhammad, there were only female survivors, which caused a whole issue later with who should be following Muhammad in the leadership of Islam. When Muhammad was 40 years old in the year 610 CE, Muhammad went into one of the caves surrounding Mecca. He prayed there, as he oftentimes did, and as he was praying, he had an encounter with the angel Jibril, which we also know as Angel Gabriel. And the angel asked him to stand up and to recite. The Arabic word for that is Quran. And Muhammad was taken aback and very scared at first. He felt like he was choked and he couldn't speak at all. He finally recited the words that the angel had given him. After this experience, Muhammad went home and was totally distraught. It was not an easy time for the first 10 years of Islam in Mecca because it was strongly persecuted. In the year 618 CE, Muhammad had a setback as his uncle Abu Talib died. With that, he lost his protection. He also lost his wife Khadija in the year 619 CE. So he had like 2 big losses within a year of each other very quickly. And so we're coming to the year 621, where we have another interesting legend that is found in the Quran in Surah 17, which is called Al-Isra wal Miraj. It's the legend of a night journey where Muhammad was taken away by a magical animal called Al-Buraq. Al-Buraq does not come up in the Quran, but in several hadith, Al-Buraq is described. And Al-Buraq is this horse, small little horse, a little bit bigger than a donkey, but smaller than a horse, that could go very, very far. Every step that it did would bring Al-Buraq beyond the horizon. And so Al-Buraq came to pick up Muhammad one night, and he took Muhammad to the Masjid Al-Aqsa, which is the mosque in Jerusalem. You may know that the old place where the old temple was, that was destroyed in the year 70 CE, that place has now a mosque. In the middle of it, you have that building with this golden dome that is called the Dome of the Rock. And inside this dome, there is apparently a stone that has a hoof print. And then off to the side is the Masjid Al-Aqsa, which is the mosque connected with that and is oftentimes seen as the 3rd most important mosque in Islam. But things in Mecca did not continue to go well. It was difficult in Mecca. And so many people had already fled to Medina, which was not called Medina yet. It was a town called Yathrib. Yathrib was an interesting town. It already existed on the maps. So the trade routes, historically speaking, the city of Yathrib did exist, and the trade routes went through there. It was inhabited by several groups. There were 2 different Arab tribes, 2 different Jewish tribes. There were some of the early Muslims that had escaped from Mecca and started settling there too. And so those 5 different tribes did not always get along very well. And so at the suggestion of some of the Arabs that had fled Mecca, they said, why don't you invite Prophet Muhammad to come as your governor, and he will institute a good life here in Yathrib. And so Muhammad followed the invitation and moved to Yathrib in the year 622 CE. This is called the Hijra. And it is in this moment, in 622, that is seen as the 0 point in the Muslim calendar. It's the Hijra, the moment when Muhammad had moved to Yathrib and had the chance to build the first Muslim community. The city of Yathrib was renamed as Medina. Medina basically is the Arabic word for city, the city of the Prophet, and for short it's called Medina. But I will end here for today so that we can pick up the story in Medina and how Muhammad built the first Muslim community, what the 5 pillars of faith were, and also talk about how Islam develops beyond the life of Muhammad. So I will see you soon again. Assalamu alaikum.